So kind of on the note of obstacle avoidance and flying safely, we're going to jump into this next article. So essentially a new kind of technology has been created for obstacle avoidance, and they've actually taken it from everyone's favorite insect, the mosquito. So essentially how it works is mosquitoes flap their wings and they create lift similar to like a downward rotor in a drone. And what they've learned is that the mosquitoes actually they're able to sense the downward kind of propulsion that they're creating, and they're able to kind of monitor how that airflow is bumping into objects, and it allows them to kind of have a good idea of if they're approaching something based on that change in airflow. They're actually calling aerodynamic imaging. So it just helps to allow them where the ground is or other obstacles they're seeing. So we're starting to see this kind of make its way into drones. It's kind of an interesting breakthrough. What are your guys' thoughts on kind of how this technology will be used for obstacle avoidance? Is this something that is brand new to you guys, or have you heard this before? And how funny is it that we're getting kind of drone ideas from our friends, the mosquitoes?
Well, reading this about mosquitoes, it explains a lot.
How they don't run into everything.
Yeah, and how they know where to land, right?
Right.
And you barely feel anything until they're off you, and then you realize that you've been bitten if you haven't put on the proper repellent. That's more of a memory growing up here. But what I would mention is I have a friend, Jesse Mooberry, works for Airbus, and their company is basically creating the maps of how delivery drones are going to coexist, as well as drones that transport people around. And, this is going to be something that we focus on in the future. I mean, Elon Musk may be talking about building a super tunnel in California. I can't remember what it's called, but, there's going to be a lot more drones in the sky in the coming decades. And so having this kind of technology is really imperative. We don't want to, and they talked about in the article also applying it to helicopters. Well, we know that, rest in peace, Kobe Bryant, helicopters
Right.
well to operate safely. So the more they can work on technology like this, I think the better it's going to be for a lot of aviation. So kudos to these scientists.
Yeah, I thought this was a really interesting article. I think to Kara's point, the autonomy and safety aspect of this is really important. As I think all of us are seeking to see more drones in the air and see that there's a lot more operations taking place. Being able to have technology that'll enable those operations to be done both more autonomously and more safely is definitely a draw. And so I think it's interesting that they're taking it from mosquitoes. And I thought the other kind of nerdy, interesting part about the article is that it said that mosquitoes are exploiting ground effect, which is a concept from the aviation world, where if you're flying really close to the ground, you're taking advantage of efficiencies and increased lift and drag. And so I think it's fascinating that we're kind of triangulating between things that we see out in the wild, things that have worked in an aviation setting previously, and we're bringing all of this new information and new way of thinking into making the drones that we use safer and in their operations.
Right. And to your point on ground effect, it said that when the researchers took that into account, they realized a mosquito could detect surfaces over 20 wing lengths away, which is pretty remarkable when you think about how far that is away, and considering how much propulsion with air propulsion the mosquitoes are actually creating is probably not a ton, because they don't weigh that much. So being able to sense something that far away is pretty incredible.
It's interesting you say that. Thinking about, let's say, like a creature like an ant who can lift, like 100 times its body weight, whatever the actual figure is. Right. So that has to do with square laws and cube laws. So it has to do with mass, essentially. At some point, the cube law takes over, and that's kind of one of the reasons why a lot of the UAM, AAN air taxi models that are proposed are more than ludicrous, is because basically spinning that fast at that mass electrically causes problems. So, but on this point, on the mosquito kind of example, it's still kind of phenomenal because we're thinking of in terms of nature kind of guiding our scientific process, which is really where science was birthed from anyway. It's naturalism being applied with the scientific method. So that's really what we're doing here. And this is still in research, right? Like this is not like on a proprietary product.
Correct.
Yeah. So that's probably good on another front too, because I think the biggest thing for us as a community is having new forms of collision detection, sense and avoid technologies that are universally kind of applicable across industries within or segments within the drone industry, across manufacturers. So we could kind of get a base level of safety that makes it easier for enterprises to make these purchases.
Yeah, I think it's important to just have a number of these kind of these technologies on board a drone, right? One of these technologies may detect and avoid better, if in wind or rain or fog, and the other may do better in another scenario. So just kind of having multiple technologies on board is obviously, I think, paramount as well.
Andrew, how often do enterprise customers talk about safety? Is that like one of their primary concerns, or are they concerned more about data integration or failure rate or things like that?
To answer your question, I think those are the two things that we talk about more than almost anything else with enterprise customers is safety and things like data integrity and compliance issues. So to the extent that we're making, that we can do anything to make operations safer is really important. I mean, if you have a large enterprise drone program, they're very safety conscious, very risk averse. They've made big investments or thinking about making big investments in a drone program. And so to the extent that that's something we see that kind of across the board, that one of the reasons that they approach Kitty Hawk is that they want to do their operations as safely as possible, and their considerations are really around mission critical processes and capabilities. The aspect of being safe and secure in their operations are really important to this subset of drone operators.